you see people posting this stuff saying this guy's losing his mind and I
mean, that implies he had it before.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, this guy
I mean,
exactly
when you in the run up to the election in 2016, we were talking about him, having untreated syphilis. So it's not like there's anything different. I think he does this to be entertaining on some level. So it's always, we'll just play all of them in one dump. I mean, the part that people really should be more worried about with Donald Trump is not that he's like an idiot and says stupid things, because he is an idiot in many respects. It's that he's, and I don't know what his ideology is, but fascism is a great tool for someone like this. And just like we saw the footage of those lunatics on January 6th, yelling and screaming everything from, I'm in the hole $400,000. That's why we're crashing into Congress here, because Mike Pence is a traitor and you're all pedophile socialists. I mean, that's just like, the 2 or 3 people there yelling into a congressman through a broken glass, window into the floor of the House. A guy like this manipulates people like that. Fascism is not just like one entity. It is a movement, and there are different players within this movement. But here is Donald Trump talking about magnets.
That didn't work. They had an almost $1 billion cost overrun on the magnetic elevators. Think of it, magnets. Now, all I know about magnets is this. Give me a glass of water. Let me drop it on the magnets. That's the end of the magnets. Why didn't they use John Deere? Why didn't they bring in the John Deere people? Do you like John Deere? I like John Deere.
What?
So here's my theory. He thinks magnets are batteries. Because batteries have a plus and a minus sign on each end, right? There's a positive and a negative charge.
Yeah.
He thinks that magnets are batteries. That's what he thinks.
Fair enough.
Or he thinks magnets are electrical, which then he brought in the John Deere stuff. Or he thinks batteries are electrical. I don't know. Lots of things getting twisted up in his head, but I'd be surprised if Donald Trump has changed a battery on the remote in his entire life and hasn't had that done for him. But he may have seen a battery or two, and so he thinks they're magnets. That's my theory.
Yeah, I think that's a good theory.
Right?
Yeah, no, I think battery's good. I think he's thinking it's like electrical, like the elevators, when they go into the water, they break up. He didn't know what he was
I do think what you're saying, Sam, it goes to the Stefan, or not the clip about the Trump and McCain, because people get caught up on how stupid and shocking what he says is, but he's actually saying like, no, we should repeal the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah.
When he says that.
This was his other quick bite. I guess he was a different. This is his different stop in Iowa.
Yeah.
Different Iowa stop.
Obamacare is a catastrophe. Nobody talks about it. Without John McCain, we would have had it done. But John McCain, for some reason, couldn't get his arm up that day. Remember? He goes that like that. That was the end of that.
There, you hear that groan in the audience.
Yeah, like, ooh. Because I think John McCain had like both his arms broken in the, like when he was
a prisoner of war,
yeah.
And so he couldn't lift. I remember that from when he ran against Obama. It was a storyline. He can't lift his arms over a certain over his head, I think, to a degree because of the injuries. He's passed away now. But
what is more important about that? Because frankly, I don't care about John McCain.
Right.
I'm sorry. I know we're supposed to say like I don't care about John McCain. I couldn't even care. I couldn't even care less. But the idea of cutting Obamacare. Remember, they voted 52 times in Congress prior to Donald Trump taking over in 2016. They could have gotten rid of Obamacare. The problem was they have no plan for health care because Obamacare, if you put aside the patient protection aspect of it, that there's no rescission, that insurance has supposed to work like supposedly the product does, which means you get hit by a bus and it costs $500,000. The insurance is no longer allowed to go like, well, I'm sorry, you're over your annual caps of $100,000 that we pay. That was effective in the ACA PPI. And the expansion of Medicaid, also effective to the extent that right-wing Republican states wouldn't prevent it from getting implemented in their states. But the rest of the program is essentially a sop to old school Republican politics. We're just going to subsidize private industry, an industry that really has no reason to exist, frankly. We don't need private health insurance.
They're a monster middleman.
We don't need it. We have Medicare.
Yep.
We could just, Medicare is the exact same thing as health insurance without about 17 cents on the dollar going to shareholders and marketing. That's the difference. But there is no Republican plan to replace it. Now, this time around, there is no John McCain. And if they get the Senate and they get the House, they will repeal it and they will replace it with nothing. Because the idea of people not having health insurance, they're okay with that. They're okay with people just getting catastrophic health insurance because they know that 80% of the cost of healthcare is borne by 20% of the people. So you do the math. The problem is you just don't know that you're going to be which part you're in. Am I in the 80% that's not going to be spending a lot on healthcare, or am I in the 20% that's going to go bankrupt? And if 20% of the population goes bankrupt because of healthcare, the Republican Party still is like, we're responsible for everybody else having their health insurance, much cheaper because it doesn't cover anything. So that's what's going on with Donald Trump in that instance. But let's play this clip because this is also the same type of thing. It's sort of amusing because the guy doesn't know basic American history. He's just sort of like speculating and trying to make it sound like, again, we've heard him do this. He would sort of he's really a better president.
People don't know Abe was a Republican.
Lincoln. But what he's also doing, to be clear, is he is reiterating the lost cause myth of the Civil War, which was the history in this country that came from the Dunning School, these historians out of Columbia, which made it seem like the Civil War wasn't really about slavery. It wasn't really about secession because they wanted to have their own slaves. It was really just about like Lincoln being a little bit too woke.
Aggressive.
It was about individual rights. The individual right for black people to be free and not enslaved and property on one end. And then the individual right of slave owners to own them as property on the other.
But here's Trump sort of like enhancing that narrative by saying like the real problem was that Lincoln couldn't make a deal. Just so that you know what the actual history is that there was an attempt to pay off the plantation owners for their slaves. That's what happened in Britain. That's what happened even in Haiti after their independence. They had to pay for 150 years, some odd, France for the right to have made themselves free, and the sort of as a property taken from their owners. Lincoln did offer to pay, and they were like, but we want the gift that keeps on giving. You're gonna pay us for a golden egg, but we're gonna keep the goose. But here is Donald Trump sort of like expressing some completely different history.
If you take a look, the wars, I don't know what it is. The Civil War was so fascinating, so horrible. It was so horrible.
I saw
so fascinating. It was, I don't know, it was just different. I just find it, I'm so attracted to seeing it. So many mistakes were made. See, there was something I think could have been negotiated, to be honest with you. I think you could have negotiated that.
Does anybody think that he's read a single book about the Civil War? Or is it just like he saw like a 30-minute documentary or maybe a PragerU analysis of what the Civil War is about?
You got to give up Fort Sumter.
I don't. I think him even looking into some sort of YouTube video about it is giving him more credit than it is due.
I wasn't looking into it. Someone just.
These are just shadings from Fox News segments he's probably seen.
You
in the
heard
past.
a guy talk, a historian on with Hannity.
Yeah.
Many people died. You know, that was the disaster. If you got hit by a bullet in the leg, you were essentially going to die or lose the leg. That's why you had so many people, no legs, no arms. If you got hit in the arm or the leg, it meant you were up because the infection, gangrene. It was just such a, sort of a horrible time. But I was thinking to myself, because I was reading something, and I said, this is something that could have been negotiated. It was just for all those people to die, and they died viciously. That was a vicious, vicious war. And in many ways, look, there's nothing nice about it, but boy, that was a tough one for our country. But I think it's, Abraham Lincoln, of course, if he negotiated it, you probably wouldn't even know who Abraham Lincoln was. He would have been president, but he would have been president. He wouldn't have been the Abraham Lincoln. Would have been different, but that would have been okay. It would have been a thing that, and I know it very well. I know the whole process that they went through, and they just couldn't get along, and that would have been something that could have been negotiated, and they wouldn't have had that problem. But it was a hell of a time. And you think of it today, I would have absolutely stopped Putin. He would have never gone in, and he didn't. For 4 years he didn't. There was never even a thought of it going in, and that was the apple of his eye. He would tell me, we would talk.
Okay, there's actually a couple of interesting things about this. One, you'll notice he talks about all of the slavery in the Civil War. And he never says the word slavery. No, yeah. And all he says is that Lincoln could have negotiated it, which was, again, not true, but the implication is this is Union aggression.
Yep.
He didn't have to go in and kill all these people. And then he's also saying that, part of the reason why Lincoln probably did the war was because he thought it would make him cooler. So you'd know his name. I mean, aside from just sort of the idea of it's quite possible we would probably know the name of the guy who negotiated away slavery, as opposed to was the president during the Civil War. But nevertheless, and I don't know how he's bringing it back to Putin here, but it's interesting that he is saying that that Ukraine was the apple of his eye, because on some level, it sounds to me like Donald Trump is undercutting the notion that it wasn't so much a question of NATO expansion, as much as it was seen as some type of possession.
Imperial expansion.
Yes.
Which we knew from the Obama era and everything, and the fact that Putin and Russia went in and invaded Crimea during that time. That was clear at that point as well. But is he drawing a comparison to Putin to essentially call Lincoln a sort of imperial expansionist? Right?
As if Putin's the same way. He just wants to go after stuff like the way that Lincoln did too.
The question for both is just practically what should they have put on the table? What should Lincoln have been willing to give up? Should he have said okay, fine, take Sumter, be a different country? What should he have put on the table? Oh, fine, keep slaves. What's the bargaining chip that he wasn't introducing?
If the roles were reversed and Lincoln were on the side of the slave owning states, they would be calling his if he were to do nothing about it, total weakness, right? But they choose to frame it as aggression because of their racism, essentially. And also, Abraham Lincoln was very hesitant to go to war and was proposing multiple compromises before Sumter.
It's how he got famous, Emma.
Yeah.
Lincoln in August 1862, he stated, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would do also that." I mean, it seems like a pretty open to a negotiation.
I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know. The South was the apple of his eye. Let's put it that way.
Showboating.